Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on another fun-filled episode. I am, in fact, your humble host, and joining me today, yes, all the way from the land down under, he is Stuart, Liberty Down Under. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show.
Hey, man, it's good to be here.
Absolutely. Stuart, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and thank you for fighting the good fight in the country that we used to look at, I think, as a relatively kind of normal, nothing really conspicuous in terms of your happenings, but all of a sudden, Australia became really topic of conversation here over the past 2 years, and maybe not for the best of reasons. So thankfully, we got folks like you, Stuart, down there fighting the good fight, and yes, being champions and voices for liberty. But let's start off. Just introduce yourselves to the Brian Nichols Show audience, and specifically, how are things down in Australia?
Look, every day is really worrying for everyone. Everyone I talk to, like, just trying to get through one day at a time at this point.
Yeah, one day at a time. Well, let's dig into that. One day at a time is tough because in our world, and I say that, we see this, I can't even really put into context of what you're experiencing. Things are rough, right? Like the cities are still, cities are still weird, but what you're experiencing, it's like everything we've experienced times 100. I mean, you have people being, locked up for standing against these just insane COVID mandates. And it doesn't seem like people are really giving an inch in terms of lifting these restrictions. Or are we wrong there, Stuart? Is there any glimmer of hope?
Look, there is, but there's not much. I think it is possible to come out of this, but it's going to be a hard fight to do.
Yeah, it definitely will be a hard fight. So specifically, why do you think it's going to be a hard fight?
Because it's all about the cultural war, really. Like, I talk to people all the time in America, and they're always like, "Oh, if you guys had guns, you'd be free." And I'm like, because we, for those who don't know, we had a mandatory gun buyback in 1996, so we've got a lot of gun control since then. A lot of Americans say, "Oh, it's because you guys don't have guns. That's why you're not fighting back against tyranny." And my argument always is, well, that's just a symptom, not the actual problem itself. The actual problem is the same mindset that caused us to give up our guns 25 years ago. Is what's causing us today to submit to tyranny. It's all about the cultural mindset to people.
What is that?
We take our freedoms for granted here. So we didn't fight a war of independence like America. We got independence by voting to get our constitution sent to the UK Parliament to get approved by them, and then they approved that and gave it to us. So we've got our independence through voting. So we haven't also fought a war like for national defense. We haven't really been at risk from war. So we don't take freedoms they're taken for granted here. They're not, really valued in any way.
Interesting. And what about the people who have now seen firsthand their individual liberties restricted? Has there been any pushback whatsoever, even though they maybe aren't inclined to look at freedom as a natural, I guess, like I want to say a natural right, which just feels so weird to even question that. But is that the case?
There's some pushback from the fringes and different state premiers, which is our version of the governor, have different approaches. They're all degrees of tyranny, but some of them aren't as bad as others. But by and large, anyone who's resisting is on the fringes of society.
Tell me more. Tell me more about the people who are resisting. Who can we look to as the people standing right now against this just authoritarian lockdown that's been taking place in Australia?
So you've got, there's a few, like our main conservative media outlet, Sky News, which is our version of Fox, has been critical of the left-wing governments and their tyranny, let's say from the right. So because, of course, they've got their own, personal agenda of, support the right, attack the left, whereas the left attacks the left, attacks the right, supports the left. So both sides are doing it, basically. But between the left and the right in the media, they're attacking everyone and defending everyone. Then you've got a few fringe political parties. I say fringe because they're minor. We do actually have minor parties, unlike America, because we've got preferential voting. So we do have a few minor parties that have a couple of senators or members of parliament here and there. A few of them have been critical of the lockdowns, but yeah, by and large, the masses are pretty supportive of it. And even when they do try and speak out, they get shut down. So we had a few tradies or tradesmen, I guess, a few weeks ago. They were protesting against mandatory vaccines in their industry in Victoria, and then the union secretary came out. The national union secretary came out and called them far right extremists. And these are union workers. So if anyone who speaks out is far extremist, the next day that was Monday. The next day we had another protest where even more tradesmen came out in force, wearing like high vis clothing, and then they got labelled by the left as being, apparently they were paid actors from the Liberal Party, which is our Conservatives. Apparently they were all paid actors, and they're all far right Nazis, neo Nazis. If you're anti-lockdown, you're pro-COVID, all this sort of rhetoric against anyone who's speaking out. And as you said, people being locked up as well. So we had one guy who was inciting protests, say he got 8 months behind bars, lots of fines. There's currently laws before the Parliament in Victoria right now for if you break restrictions and put someone at serious risk. It's a $90,000 fine or 2 years behind bars. That is, in US dollars, that's 67,000. I'm pretty sure, 90,000 Australian dollars. So it's ridiculous.
Wow. It's interesting. You say everybody who opposes the COVID regime over in Australia, they're either labeled far right extremists, neo Nazis, and wow, people in America, they're nodding their head in agreement because you hear the echo of that. And instead, was it here? You're racist, right? We heard this with Glenn Youngkin winning his seat there in Virginia for the governorship. In response to it, you had a chorus of leftist pundits on all the corporate media channels, and what were they saying? Racism, 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 racism. And I think your average person, though, is starting to maybe tune that out, at least here in America. Is that not the case in Australia, or do you see a glimmer of hope?
Look, as I said before, there is some hope. There's not much, but there is some hope. It'll be like, I don't expect to see anything change this year. I'm expecting maybe in the new year, if we see the military being brought in, or when the COVID camps finally get up and running, that sort of stuff. Like, that's when we could see people resisting. But like in America, you guys have the Bill of Rights, so people at least know their theoretical rights, and they have an understanding. Like, I've got the right to free speech, the right to bear arms. We didn't have anything like that. A couple of states have human rights acts as just normal statutes. They're not the same level as the Constitution. They're just the same as everything else. And those acts have built into them safety provisions, so that rights can be overridden in the name of safety. So we don't have this understanding. People don't know their rights. Literally, people just don't understand, what they are and aren't allowed to do. Whereas in America, you guys do have the Bill of Rights, so that everyone can see it and read it, and it's simple to understand. People know their rights.
People don't know their rights there, and what's scary is that you said it might take the COVID camps. I wrote a note there. You said COVID camps in the military to wake people up. But that's sad, but that maybe that will give you guys a little bit of a jump start, because you saw that, especially, in the 1950s and 60s, what really jump started the civil rights movement was your average person saying, no, we're not going to see Black Americans be, beaten and have dogs chase after them. These are people, and your average person started to say enough. And I'm hoping that, and unfortunately, right, if it came to that your average person who is so numb to what has been really, to your point, and you hit this, I think, the nail on the head. We had this here, especially in a lot of these more blue cities here in America, is this kind of just underappreciation for what freedom actually is, and how easily it can be lost. And if you did have a little bit of a jump start, it could really give people in Australia some hope, maybe, and then maybe we can avoid this from happening in the future. Because, I mean, I see it. We had livelihoods crushed, and it was all in the name of public safety, right? The in our world, it was the unessential workers versus the essential workers. So, where do you see in terms of reaching the people who are turned off right now? How would you want to diagnose and trying to maybe get a playbook set up to reach them, to get them to maybe be more empathetic to the anti-lockdown, anti-mandate narrative?
Well, that's why that's why I encourage non-violent resistance, because I look at, like, as you said, the civil rights movement. We saw that, you know, they weren't fighting back with firearms. They were civil non-resistance. You know, civil disobedience. They were not being violent, and that's how they won hearts and minds. So I see it as very much being a hearts and minds issue, a cultural battle, not a political one. Because the problem we have is, if anything political, is an uphill battle, because we've got so much apathy over here. So, for those who don't know, voting is mandatory in Australia. It's been mandatory for about 100 years. So people see it as a civil duty, not a democratic privilege or anything like that. So people just go out on a Saturday, cast their vote at the election, and then go home for the rest of the day, because it's on the weekend as well. So people, you see it as being, you know, same as everything else in their life. It's not nothing important. So there's political apathy all across the country because of that. So even if we tried to do a political campaign, a lot of people just wouldn't care. So for every voter that we turn against the establishment, there's another voter that will be voting for them regardless, because all they know is the two major parties. So they go to the election, tick the box, and say they want to vote for this party, and then just go home. So that's the problem we have in political, the political fights. We have to rely on more the cultural side of things.
Well, right there, the cultural side of things, I see it in America. I see the temperature, it's changed. The narratives have changed. There's a poll that just came out as we're recording here today on the 9th. I think it was The Hill. It had a poll that they just highlighted, and it was 70% or 77% of Americans say that woke culture has gone too far. And that, there's only like 29% think that woke culture is acceptable. And that shows to me that there's a large group of people who have acknowledged fundamentally that the leftist progressive narratives has entirely jumped the shark. And I'm seeing the conversations change just in my circles, just by people acknowledging how insane the narrative is. What do you think is stopping people from kind of not even the apathy that you spoke of, but just getting out of that cognitive dissonance bubble of looking to see just what else is out there in terms of thought and the way of thinking in terms of approaching these problems with different solutions?
So I think the problem for us is, almost all of the media that we have is saying the same things. Same with the government. So everyone's saying the same message over and over again. So it gets stuck in their minds that this is the only way to do it. It's all about safety. So I think that's what it is. They're constantly surrounded by the same information. There's no diversity, really. As I said, we do have one news outlet that's more conservative. But even then, they're still not attacking. So even then, like, they're only going to pick on certain states. I'm talking to people up in Queensland, which is where I am, and they criticise Dan Andrews in Victoria, but not the government in New South Wales, which is more conservative. So it's all divided along political lines, but ultimately there's no one attacking. We've told it's left versus right, not state versus the people. So people are too busy fighting one another to focus on fighting the state.
It is state versus the people, absolutely. And let's dig into beyond the corporate media. What about social media? Because I know I've seen that there's been an attempt, and I'm not sure, tell me if I'm wrong, did it actually go through in trying to curtail people from sharing information that goes against the government narrative in Australia from different social media channels?
Yeah, so there's all over the place there, shutting people down and stopping them from speaking out. We've had police came to people's houses, door knocking with memes that they've made online. In New South Wales, no, sorry, in Melbourne, in Victoria, we had I think it was Melbourne. We had the police went to the house of a woman who was pregnant because she shared one post on Facebook about the protests. People being locked up. The guy who got 8 months behind bars, he ran an Instagram account that was anti lockdown. He got, and because of that was around 20,000 followers. He got 8 months behind bars because of it. When we had the tradie protests, Facebook stopped all live streams, so you couldn't even do live streams to show what's happening on the ground. At the same time, the Victorian police got a no-fly order over Melbourne, so the civilian helicopters couldn't fly over it and get aerial shots of how big the protests were. So it's a collaboration by the media outlets, social media, and the police, really.
How do you communicate? So how are you able to get the messaging out there with all of these barriers that have been put in your way?
I think it's just sheer determination at this point, honestly. Even Telegram isn't perfect because you've got police going on there and undercover agents going on there. So it is really, trust no one. People have to have very, very strict personal security measures online so that a lot of people, like, that's why you see so few podcasters, because everyone wants to hide their face, because they don't want to get caught for it, because there was a law passed earlier this year that allows the federal government to access your phones if they think you could commit a federal crime like treason. So they think they can access your phones, and edit and alter all data on your phones and computers if they think that you might, if they have a reasonable suspicion that you might commit a crime that is a federal crime. We haven't seen anything on the state level like that yet, but we have seen that at a federal level. So that's your treason, that sort of stuff. So that's worrying as well. So people have to be very, very, guarded in what they do and what they say online. That's why you don't see me saying things like Nazi and fascist and communist, because I'm like, I'm not going to touch that, because if I do, I could be banned. I'll do more good being on here and just being a bit more careful than I would by going outright and saying Nazi and communist and fascist and getting banned. I could do more good in the long term by not using those words, because I can use other words instead, and still get the same message across without using that language. So but then people that I know will still people in the opposite direction, and they'll always say Nazi and fascist and communist. So it just depends on the person and what they think is necessary for them to avoid government when it comes to social media.
I laughed when you just said that's worrying. Yeah, it's worrying because it's a little it's a little dystopian. If we're gonna be real, Stuart. Like,
yes, you're not wrong.
We're talking about this, and this is the part that kind of blows me away. We're in 2021, and 2 years ago, 2019. But if we had even said, okay, worst case scenario, where do you see the planet in 2 years, in a year? I don't even think in your most insane Stephen King novel would you have what's really not just taken place in specific hotspots, but it's taken place globally. And we've seen it. This is where I get banned. We've seen it seems like a concerted effort across the board to have one narrative of what works to prevent the virus, and then the other saying, hold up, timeout. Can we look at the actual data? Can we look at the actual science? That's why I've been trying to raise up the voices of people like Nick Hudson from Panda, because they're going out and they're doing the hard work to look and find not just the actual data of the pandemic, but also going into the context of it and showing not just the death toll and the numbers, but also the economic impacts as well. And you have other folks out there like Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownstone Institute who are doing great work. So that's why we need to raise up more of these voices. And candidly, Stuart, that's why it's sad that we have to get to a point where we only can get 1 or 2 people from Australia to be able to come on shows because they're afraid. They're afraid to even talk about stuff because of what the government might do from knocking in their door because they posted a meme. Man, I'm hoping for you guys. I'm praying for you guys. So what can we do, right? This show is about solutions. We want to be able to help wherever we can. So where can we help? What can we do on our end to help all you folks down under from going under?
But I think the best thing that you guys can do is make some noise. If you see anything online, share it, especially police violence. That's the big thing that'll get people's attention. Because if you just average your normal news story, just saying here's an update on Australia, isn't going to be as hard hitting as here's a police officer beating up a woman. Here's a police officer pepper spraying a woman at the protests. That's going to be what you use to get real anger, because we have seen some people, even more moderates, have seen the police violence. That's been enough for them to flip against the government. But then on the other hand, you've got leftists who are now calling for police brutality. Antifa, Australian Antifa, which is, I wish I had to stay with you guys. I don't think we should have it over here. It's bad enough as it is without having Antifa over here. Antifa is doing pro-lockdown rallies now. They're doing counter protests against anti-lockdown protesters. Then they're doing apparently they're doing a pro-lockdown protest later this month at some point, which is ridiculous. But they're out there, saying that really anyone should be locked up and the police need to enforce these mandates. If you don't comply, you should be locked up. We're seeing all these leftists online, supporting police violence. When last year they were saying that we need to defund the police.
Right. Oh my God.
I put a clip out there a couple of months ago. In fact, we had a police officer, the Deputy Police Commissioner for Victoria last year, said that it's a human right to be able to protest. And then you have a police commander this year from Victoria again, who said the protests do nothing, they've never worked, don't do it. So everyone, like this time last year, or June, July last year, you had police kneeling with protesters. Same time this year, you got police pepper spraying protesters for wanting freedom of choice. So definitely, sharing everything you can, creating international outrage. Again, obviously, you're not going to win over the far left. The far left would probably say you guys are meddling Americans, meddling Brits, etc. But you've got like the MPs from Poland, for example, that were outside the Australian embassy complaining about the Australian government. So create an international anger to force the government's hand is probably the best thing that you guys can do right now, while we try and fight on the ground. It's got to be a concerted effort from all around the world if we want to have any chance of freedom, because Australians alone can't do this, because there's no internationally, we're not seeing much condemnation. But if we can get the international pressure as well on the government, because we know the government cares about their image internationally, so if we can try and rely on that and use some leverage there, that'd definitely be advantageous for us Australians.
I'm just shocked, Stuart, that we're having this conversation about Australia of all places. It still baffles my mind. But with that being said, obviously, yes, we will make sure we continue to raise awareness, and we'll continue to raise the fervor when we see the atrocities taking place. Yes, specifically from the hands of those state agents, and unfortunately, it's those people who are sadly behind that thin blue line. In many cases, right here in Australia, you're seeing in your case how quickly things can turn from being the people who protect and serve to now are enforcing and demanding, and that's scary. So with that being said, we want to make sure we can point folks, especially for our audio listener, to go ahead and find you online to continue the conversation. So with that being said, Stuart, where can folks go ahead and reach out if they want to learn more?
So on Twitter, LibertyDownUnder _UNDR. On Instagram, it's UNDER. Then you can check out our podcast, The Gumtree of Liberty, which is on Apple, Spotify, etc. Plus the Australian Liberty Network, which I've set up to help get the message out there. We've got that's what the podcast is part of that. We've got a website being launched, hopefully within a week. It's been a very delayed, but hopefully that should come out within a week. A website as well. You can find our YouTube channel, Australian Liberty Network, on YouTube. We put some videos there, some live streams about what's going on over here as well.
Awesome.
And
well, how about this?
You can find that page. You can find that page on Twitter at AusLib Network as well.
Don't you love the fact that, you're already in the future? By the way, we're recording here I said that we're recording the 9th. He's already on the 10th. He's recording 9 a.m. his time. So yeah, if you heard a little bit of a lag there, folks, don't blame us. It's the fact that we're, across the world from each other. And also probably the Australian feds are going after us. So with that being said, folks, we'll make sure we include all of the links so it's easier for you to go ahead and follow Stuart, and also support all the work that they're doing down there, quite literally down there, down under, Liberty Down Under. We'll go ahead, head over to thebriannicholsshow.com. Show notes. You can go ahead, click your show note link, artwork right there on the podcast catcher. It'll bring you to not only today's episode, where you can find the entire transcript of the episode, but also all 400 plus episodes of The Brian Nichols Show. But with that being said, Stuart from Liberty Down Under, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.